President Trump has left the G7 summit in Canada early because of the continuing crisis in the Middle East. White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt made the announcement Monday evening, saying President Trump is returning to Washington so that he can attend to many important matters.
When a global superpower, one that once shaped wars, built alliances, and wrote the rules of the world, quietly walks out of the room, the silence it leaves behind is deafening. It's not just a political gesture, it's a tremor that shakes the foundations of diplomacy. Was this a calculated move in a high-stakes global game? Or was it the first crack in the facade of international order, a signal that the era of unity is slipping into chaos?
It's G7 time here in Alberta as some of the most powerful and famous politicians are touching down here in Western Canada.
At the G7 summit in Alberta, Canada, suddenly took a dramatic and unexpected turn. In the middle of high-level discussions and carefully staged diplomacy, a moment occurred that cast a long shadow over the entire gathering. President Donald Trump abruptly canceled all his scheduled meetings. No farewell remarks, no warning to fellow leaders, just a sharp, silent exit. He boarded Air Force One and departed for Washington under the cover of diplomatic ambiguity. There was no tweet, no press conference, no formal declaration, just a carefully worded statement released by his spokesperson, Karoline Leavitt. A single sentence that dropped into the global conversation like a cold stone in still water. President Trump is leaving early due to escalating tensions in the Middle East. That was it. But behind those few words lurked far more questions than answers. If the crisis in the Middle East was truly so urgent, then why walk away from the very table where solutions are meant to be built? Trump had stood beside British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, beaming before the cameras, signing a high-profile bilateral trade deal between the US and the UK. A symbolic handshake meant to show the world that American leadership was alive and well. The optics were clean. The moment was staged. But something changed almost instantly. Because when the conversation inside the summit walls shifted from economic cooperation to geopolitical threats, when the words Iran, Gaza, Syria, and Russia began dominating the room, Trump's demeanor altered. Gone was the negotiator. He didn't present a plan. He didn't build a coalition. He simply left. A summit meant for unity turned into a symbol of division, and a president who once boasted about being the deal maker walked away from the biggest deal of all, the fragile piece of a world on the brink. Trump's sudden departure wasn't just unexpected, it was deeply symbolic. It was a rupture in protocol, a statement without words, and for the host nation it posed a critical question. How do you hold a summit when one of the most powerful leaders in the world walks out mid-dialogue? Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney didn't hesitate. In a move that was as bold as it was strategic, Carney took an unprecedented step. He scrapped the G7's traditional joint communiqué entirely, a document that usually represents unity among the world's top democracies. In its place, he issued 3 distinct declarations, each focused, each intentional. One addressed climate change, another reaffirmed support for Ukraine, and the third focused squarely on the humanitarian and security crisis unfolding in Gaza. The message could not have been more clear. Donald Trump would not be allowed to hold global consensus hostage. Not this time. It was a moment that transformed diplomatic etiquette into an assertion of values. In that single decision, Carney did more than save the summit. He redefined leadership in a fractured world, because sometimes leading doesn't mean pleasing everyone. It means pushing forward, even when one of your allies becomes an obstacle. Back in Washington, Trump's sudden exit sent shockwaves through Capitol Hill. What seemed like a diplomatic misstep quickly escalated into a strategic concern. Senators on both sides of the aisle warned that if the United States failed to remain engaged at this moment, it risked being dangerously unprepared for a multi-front war. The fear wasn't just about one crisis, it was about a pattern. From Ukraine to Gaza, from the Taiwan Strait to the Red Sea, conflict zones were no longer isolated. They were increasingly connected. One defense analyst put it bluntly, "We're witnessing the rise of a new axis of power: Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran. These nations, while not formally aligned, are coordinating in ways that challenge the post-World War II order." And in that context, America's absence wasn't just bad optics. It was a strategic vacuum. Critics warned that if Washington continues to walk away from summits designed for collective defense, it may soon find itself fighting alone. In a world where its traditional allies are no longer certain it will stay in the room when it matters most. Trump's absence wasn't just a diplomatic gap. It was a dangerous signal that America was no longer committed to leading. Meanwhile, Israel launched a new wave of airstrikes in southern Lebanon. Iran-backed militias responded aggressively, and Iranian-made drones continued to rain down on Ukrainian cities. It was now evident that global conflicts were no longer regional. They were interconnected, links in the same chain. And just when these links were tightening, the United States walked away from the table. These weren't isolated flashpoints, they were coordinated pressure points, spreading across continents. What became unmistakably clear was this: the crises we once viewed as separate, Ukraine, Gaza, Syria, Lebanon, were now converging. The conflicts were no longer regional, they were interconnected, links in the same global chain of instability. And just as those links were tightening, just as the moment called for unity, strategy, and leadership, the United States walked away from the table. It wasn't just absence, it was silence when the world most needed a voice of resolve. This wasn't just a failed summit, it marked the unraveling of Western unity. The G7 once symbolized liberal democracies aligning against authoritarian regimes. Now, the US was acting more like a disruptor than a leader, preferring isolation over cooperation. In his post-summit remarks, Mark Carney didn't mention Trump by name, but his message was unmistakable. This is a moment for principled cooperation, not performative disruption.
Western powers converge in Alberta to talk conflict and commerce.
I'm a tariff person. Mark has a more complex idea, but also very good.
The U.S. president offers the hint of a potential deal.
Friends, the world is changing. Leadership isn't about muscle, it's about presence, patience, and partnership. If you believe in knowing the truth behind world events, then hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and let us know your thoughts in the comments. We'll be back with another untold story soon. Until then, stay alert, stay informed.